Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Man Talk podcast. This is episode 39. Today, we're going to be talking about how to have authentic conversations with people. Part of the reason why we're talking about this is because in talking with Jacob offline, I noticed that he really dislikes a lot of conversations he has with in his case, his coworkers, but he can speak more to that. What exactly about those conversations don't you like, Jacob? It feels like, yeah, they're your coworkers, so it's mostly going to be a small talk. But what about them, or what about that mentality towards conversation really irks you?
So there's multiple categories besides coworkers. There's family, friends, coworkers, and strangers. And I noticed through all four of them, I've been seeing either what's new is always on the conversation list, but it's not bad. It's just if it just stays there, you're always in the small talk. You're not really getting anywhere. So that's more of a coworker issue or family issue if I haven't seen them in a while, because then you're not going to talk to them for a little bit. But the other problems I've been seeing are when people just want to win in a conversation and it has nothing to do with about an actual discussion. So very anti-scientific, which is who we are. We're definitely more on the pro-science field. We both come from the STEM field kind of credentials. So for me, when someone just wants to win, I find that inauthentic. And
What do you mean by when, in terms of how the conversation flows?
so whether they're going to be doing either a straw man argument or they're going to be just trying to make you look like the inferior person in the argument. However, it's going to be done, they're going to try and cut it up such that it looks like they won, they laugh in your face, and they go away. So I've seen that enough times where I find it super inauthentic, and I'm surprised they can get away with it. And I've been keeping tabs on some of these people, and I wanted to have something like this such that we can design a more authentic way to talk to one person to another, whether it's stranger, coworker, family, or a friend. So that was something that was on my mind a lot. Definitely on the just wanting to win aspect, which I find extremely inauthentic.
Yeah, I noticed in my own life that some of the worst conversations I've had with people, besides, the ubiquitous, what's it called? Small talk. I hate small
Yeah.
talk because small talk, yes, it's like a social grace, but it's also more of a cop out for having genuine conversation because you don't need to talk about something that is either meaningful or more relevant to each other's perspective. Like, I don't consider work necessarily small talk, talking about work, but I do consider like talking about your weekend or talking about your favorite dishes or what you did, just kind of surface level, not really engaging, just poor conversational form. And yes, obviously, you're not going to have that level of depth at work, but I would still make the case that you can get a little bit more deep, and we'll go over that methodology here in how to have that authentic conversation, how to connect with people at a more meaningful level than just try to put others down, being narcissistic and only focusing on getting information out of other people versus having a mutual respect, mutual reciprocity, that sort of thing. So, based on that, Jacob, what have you noticed? What qualities have you noticed lead to a more authentic conversation just right off the bat?
Authentic conversations I've had usually involve giving people the space. So listening, being a good listener, allowing people to hear the full side of what they're trying to get at. Um, Allowing space for people is probably the biggest one that I've been able to find, because even if they're bad at talking, they can at least give enough space where they can put their thoughts together. Jordan Peterson said a lot that people talk and think, they're kind of mixed together. There is some computation going on in the conversation that's authentic because they're actually trying to dig up something in their brain that they're going to put together and get it on another level. And then maybe it can be critiqued honestly by the other person, but in a way that's constructive. So constructive criticism would be that second attribute. And being able to accurately and be able to analyze what's going on within their thought process, that's huge because now they can actually fix it. They can get.
Do you have world examples of specific individuals who do this with you?
I mean, we do this in our own podcast all the time, so you can really just get any particular example from who's been on here. Um, I can refer to podcast 6 with Edgar. So, Edgar, what was great about him was he and I both came up with questions, and we both wanted to hear each other out on how to answer them. And then we may even go one step better to see maybe that's not even the right question. Maybe the real question is, and we'd bring up a whole new and improved version of the conversation we wanted to have. And I really like that. And there's a fair amount of enthusiasm that comes with it when both parties are wanting that. So I guess the third aspect would be an enthusiasm marker. So you actually want to talk to this person. You're hearing them out. You're giving constructive criticism on their end. They're doing a reciprocity end on your end, which would be the fourth characteristic. And you put all those characteristics together, and that's really something that's quite pleasant. You can't always have it, of course, because like you said in the coworker sense, there's usually some other tasks going on. So small talk is kind of a filler, mainly because you have to focus on a primary task at hand. So that's something to keep in mind in some of these cases. But we're talking about authentic conversations. So if you want to have them, those are some of the criteria that are necessary.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that probably one of the words you're looking for is engaging and communicating on multiple levels. So maybe utilize a surface level talking point to dive deeper in how you really feel about that subject. And you speak openly, honestly, with purpose and directly to your friend or coworker, whomever you're talking to, such that they see where you're coming from. And that perspective shift is probably the most important part, I would say, because it's like, oh, they understand what I'm saying. They understand where I'm coming from. There's a mutual understanding taking place right here. And that's difficult to do if you can't break past that initial surface skim, as it were, of talking. And that also implies that you have to be willing to open up a little bit, to express yourself in such a way that the other person is allowed to see you for who you are without you worrying about how they're going to perceive you, you know?
It takes courage. Oh, yeah.
Right. So, on the flip side of that, bad conversationalists just talk about themselves all the time. They don't ask you about you. And then, even if when you tell them, hey, maybe you should consider this, they disregard your perspective as ungracefully as possible, let's say. And a number of ways they do that is they make light of your suggestion. They just keep talking past your suggestion. It's like they're talking to themselves, essentially. And a lot of conversations that I've been a part of, it really does feel like they're talking past me. Like there's someone over my shoulder that they're actually talking to. And maybe that's just a reflection of themselves looking back at them. And I'm just a vessel for them to work out ideas. Not very reciprocal, not very like engaging on my part. But yeah, the main way to buttress against that is just to, if you see that, remind them like, hey, I'm here. I don't know who you're talking to or what's on your mind exactly, because it feels like you're a little bit distant right now, you know?
Calling it out's one way. And we've been there where it feels like they may as well be talking to themselves. They are processing still. It's just you could replace me with somebody else in that conversation and he'd be doing the same thing. So it's something to consider, to call it out, but also just going, look, you obviously need to think about this some more. Maybe you should journal this, or you don't really need to talk to me. It sounds like you need to like actually go in a corner or something and figure this out, because you obviously don't want to hear what I have to say. So maybe go journal it out and get a more constructed version of what your ideas are, and then come back if you actually want to hear me. Um, it's hard to bring that up sometimes because it's the easy choice to just sit there, and I'm definitely more of this character at work. Just sit there, let them do their 5 to 10 minute spiel, and then before you know it, they run out of gas, so that way you can just bail um, at the next job opportunity.
One way where you could get help on that is establishing those boundary conditions. Just trying to frame it so that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be talking about this right now, or oh, you're overstepping a line with your venting. You're at work. Maybe you need to de-stress a bit in a different context in a different place.
And that's at least for the coworker side. For friends and family, where they got you on personal time, now that's a little harder to wiggle your way out of. Depending on your group size, you might be able to use that excuse. Hey, you probably shouldn't be getting that upset because you're getting 5 other people all riled up. But if it's one on one, that's where it gets a little tougher. So, but you said it already, having some kind of frame where that's not okay for them to just do that to you. So, having even one witness would actually help that quite a bit. That's happened to me before at work when someone was really getting angry, and I had one witness, and that calmed down the situation quite a bit. Even though they kept going, everyone in the group's kind of going, yeah, you can't do that. That's not okay. So there was a lot of de escalation that could happen, whereas if I was by myself, that might have gotten uglier.
Yeah. What's your view? What's your view on people who ask kind of probing questions and don't really set it up in such a way where it's very graceful? What's your like initial perspective on that?
So ungraceful probing. So this is definitely more on the coworker end. Um, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and at least answer a surface level of response. At least give them something. The key here is to lean in. It's not to lean out. If you don't lean in, your tendency for these people who are usually a little nefarious, they're going to get interested because they understand that you backed away. So they go, oh, no, 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 no. I'm actually even more interested now. And then there may even be 1 or 2 more people that decide to join in. So the key here is to actually lean into what they're saying and show some courage. And that seems to be a good way to deal with people. Um, and then afterward, be on the aggressive side and say, okay, well, you asked me a question. Now that we're at work, I'm asking you about whatever's going on, whether it's a particular piece of documentation or work hours or what's going on with supervision, something that's more relevant to their life um, at within their work life. So I can't stress that enough, though. If you lean out and they're probing, most people that have time on their hands are now even more interested than they were before. So don't do that. Lean in, have some courage, and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, in that case, active listening goes a long way because you can pay attention to what they're trying to ask you and then provide a satisfactory answer such that they stop probing down that line of thought that you think they're going to go down and, essentially puts out the fire that could have started if they kept probing, getting more information out of you.
Now I'm curious
Uh,
though, for friends and family, do you have any thoughts for the other sectors um,
for
uh,
probing,
for probing?
yeah, so for me, basically, if I don't want someone to go down a train of path, I just give the bare minimum answer that's satisfactory, even with family, even with friends, such that it answers the question, but it doesn't offer much more meat on the bone, so to speak, for them to continue pursuing it. Because for me, it's not necessarily a dishonest tactic, but it's more like okay, I'll answer your question, but I'm not gonna give you all the meat and potatoes of the answer, right? I'm just gonna answer it and then hopefully shift the subject into something that's more appropriate.
So maybe an honest way
Or
to do that would be give them the most or the minimum complete answer that still is what you're getting at as far as the truth, but make it as least interesting as possible, where they're more willing to change the conversation and go, okay, well, that was rather unsatisfying. Let's try for something else.
if they're well socialized and they understand that, oh, your body language is kind of getting tensed up, and you're showing them through your lack of interest in the subject matter that you're not willing to talk about it, they will pick up on, okay, well, he answered, he doesn't want to go into details, so I'm going to leave it be. Because what I've noticed, at least in the last decade, people, if they want to talk, they'll talk. They'll talk your ear off and talk forever, right? If they don't want to talk or they just want to be left alone, they're going to be very silent. And if you're one of those unfortunate individuals who likes to pry and get the quiet people to open up, you might find yourself in a difficult position where you're becoming the bad conversationalist, right? Because if they don't want to talk about it and you're forcing the issue, what's your motivation for doing so? And not reading their hesitation of sharing. And that could just be from your own lack of socialization and not reading body language. But more likely, it's probably you just want to get details out of them for your own self gratification and not necessarily for a mutual beneficial scenario, you know?
Yeah, give people space. If they don't want to talk about it, that's fine. There's plenty of other subjects. And for what it's worth, there's in all four categories I mentioned as far as strangers, family, friends, coworkers, you don't have to talk about everything with all those groups. Chances are you're probably only going to show select conversation topics for them. But I'd say an authentic way is if they wanted to go down some of those rabbit holes and maybe find out more about you, that's fine. It's just make it available in a way that is not going to be too burdensome for any of the four groups we've mentioned. Um, if it needs to be a burden, that's a different story. Like with family, if they just need to hear hard news, that's one thing. But maybe it's not for their ears to hear because it's super personal. So in that case, reserve it for only a specific group. And I'd say be honest about it and say, that is going to stay within my family, unfortunately. And you don't have access to that. And just let them know that it's not okay for them to know. Um,
Right. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that not everybody has to fit the same conversational paradigm that you want them to fit. They're their own unique individual. If they don't like talking, then there's little to no benefit to force the issue and change their personality to become a talkative, interesting person. What's a lot easier is you let them be and you find individuals who do enjoy talking, who share interests with you, share share basically the same background or hobbies that you do so that you do have something to talk about or you do strive to better each other through your conversations. Like I know several housemates that we've had who, if you try to talk to them, they just kind of don't answer and don't go any deeper than they have to. And those are frustrating conversations because you want to get to know them better, but they're putting up impedances basically. So over time, I had to learn, okay, I don't have that kind of conversation with them. I have it with the other housemate, such as you, Jacob, who enjoys having these style of conversations where you explore ideas that maybe you haven't really worked through on your own and might be impossible to work through on your own because you lack the perspective, for example.
And for what it's worth, a lot of people don't want to go that deep, but that's okay. You just got to, as you said, surround yourself with people that do. And then there's this initial, uh, I'd say, verbal contract of how deep do we want to go, and then there's an authorization that's kind of being done with body language. And if both parties are trying to be mutual, there's definitely going to be a okay, we're greenlighting this conversation. It's going to happen. We'll see what we can do to get our ideas to be accurately laid out, analyzed, refined, and perhaps we may come up with a new idea that is meta to them, that was better than when we walked into the conversation with, let's say, before the conversation began.
Yeah, and sometimes those growth-based conversations can be the best because both parties are voluntarily consenting to engaging in this authentic expression of what they believe, and the other party is either listening or building on their own experiences or their own ideas about the scenario such that both parties come to a mutual understanding of where each other's coming from and maybe even come away with it with something to then consider. Like, I think I remember you telling me when we were doing the pre planning for this podcast that I gave you something to consider that you hadn't really considered before. Do you remember that or off the top of your head?
For something to consider, I know we were talking about the five traits of the big five. Um, wasn't really thinking about that for this. Um, there may have been something else, but that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and what Jacob's referencing is the big five personality characteristics: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And basically, the consideration that I brought up at the time was, oh, what if someone just has the anti-conversationalist big five traits, right? Then knowing that, you probably want to engage in conversation with them. For example, if someone's extremely disagreeable, do you really want to have this style of authentic conversation with them? Probably not. They probably don't even want to consent to being probed to, even if it could be beneficial to them, you know?
Yeah, we were talking about the different optimizing conversations you can have. So if you're way too disagreeable, it's going to get really hard to get things moving because you're just not going to have any of your ideas analyzed in a positive light. Chances are they're going to talk about what they want only. So there's a balance. There's a balance between being disagreeable and agreeable. Um, if you're way too neurotic, for example, that's going to be way too much on the paranoid, danger, something's about ready to take me on, versus someone with no neuroticism is bad because everything's fine all the time. There's never any danger. Now, I'd recommend being more on the lower end of this perspective for neuroticism. But we had some conversations, we were going over that in the pre planning, that I guess we could tackle some more here.
Yeah, so like with extroversion, that's definitely super helpful when you have these styles of conversations. And just an example we were bringing up with neuroticism, I feel like a neurotic extrovert might be the combination that helps them try to resolve their neuroticism because they get energy from people, right? So, in theory, if they're neurotic, they can have those conversations with all these people who enjoy large groups. And maybe in that combination, they can try to help themselves. Or it could be that they're very introverted and they have low neuroticism, so they don't want to talk to anyone, right? They're just perfectly content with themselves. So if you try to like talk to those people, you're just going to get into a scenario where, oh, well, I just want to focus on me. I don't really want to talk to you. Sorry. And it just no avenue for success in that conversation.
And we were also talking about some of the conditioning that people should be doing with their personalities. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck on these traits. Their primary traits will define them forever. And that's actually not what the Big Five is about. What it's saying is, yeah, that's what you're biologically wired for. But if you can discipline your brain and see if you can be conditionably agreeable if you're disagreeable, that's dangerous because that means you can actually have conversations. And then, right when it's time for you to strike, as far as getting what you need. So, in the case of like a coworker's aspect, getting them to do what you want them to do as a manager, being conditionally agreeable as a manager, as a disagreeable personality type, is super important for them at least. And then for me, I'm more on the agreeable side. So it pays to be conditionally disagreeable about particular issues. So that way, when people try and take advantage of you or exploit you, because agreeable people have a tendency to have that happen to them, you can actually fight back and stand up for yourself. And even though you're an agreeable personality type, you're not getting walked over. So that's fair. That's a fair assessment for people who are trying to be the ideal self, which is how we have this model and what we're trying to do in conversation. So, in conversation, having some kind of hybrid, agreeable, disagreeable type, whether it's primary or secondary, doesn't really matter. It seems as if as long as you're working towards being agreeable as a disagreeable personality type, or an agreeable primary and conditionable disagreeable, we can at least have something going for us there. But we can get into some of the other big five as well, like conscientiousness. You were saying how it doesn't really affect the conversation, and I wanted to get into why.
Yeah, so from my perspective, conscientious person who is, or a highly conscientious person who's engaging in a conversation, maybe they're just organizing their conversation more structuredly, so they could be a better storyteller. But I don't believe it actually has a great bearing on the quality of the conversation because I think that's more in line with openness to experience, meaning that if you want to have the most authentic conversation with someone, you probably want someone to be the most open. Why? Because they're more willing to offer their presence, their time, and they're intellectually curious. So essentially, someone who's more highly on the openness to experience portion of the big five is going to be the type of person who enjoys conflict in terms of conversations that might contradict their worldview because they want to understand the world. They want to know what's going on around them. A low openness to experience individual, on the other hand, doesn't care about what's going on, is very much this works, I'm going to follow this, and that's it. They're rigid in their thinking. So, but to go back to your original query, I don't think whether you're highly or lowly conscientious, it's really gonna have that large of a factor, except in how you tell the stories, not whether you're going to be a great conversationalist. I think that's more on the openness to experience side.
Okay, because I was thinking I would like to add at least a if then statement. So if you get too low in conscientiousness, your means to speak in a well structured manner go down. So I would recommend to have a threshold of no, it's only going to matter on the extreme.
Yeah,
So if it matters, I would say it would matter if as long as you're staying above the threshold such that your words actually mean what they mean. Because if you get
yeah, coherence.
yeah, so your coherence is your minimum standard. But I would say though on the extreme of higher end of conscientiousness, it might be more fun depending on how you mix the other big five traits. And because of the high conscientiousness aspect, you may be getting into stuff that's super cool because they can actually explain it and get it articulated. So I
Yeah,
actually was going to disagree with you on that one, mainly on the extremes. Um, it could be
yeah.
more
For the
fun
for
if
the
it,
average conscientious person, you probably wouldn't notice. But
right.
yeah, say you have a high conscientious person, like you're getting at, they're probably also pretty logical in how they describe things. So if you're trying to learn from someone some complicated task, they could probably take that task, break it down into the simplest step by step process, And just listening to them, you get a lot out of the content of what they're trying to say because it's so ordered, it's so structured. So yeah, that makes sense.
So on the extremes, I would disagree. But yeah, if you're fulfilling the minimum criteria for making sure your words and grammar at least correlates to what we call English, then yeah, you're in. Openness, yeah, that's kind of a gimme because if the less open you're gonna be, how will you ever be able to explain some of the stuff you're actually going to want to converse about? Your very mindset will prevent you from doing that. So conversations will be more abrupt because you don't want people getting too close.
Especially coupled with low extroversion. You're closed off and you're an introvert. You and what's worse, say it deep down inside you really want to be a social butterfly. You have to do a lot of training to just get yourself in the mindset like, hey, I want to be more extroverted. I want to have more experiences outside of my little bubble, but it's not my nature. I have to work past my nature to achieve to obtain those things.
So for what it's worth, it sounds like all these different combinations. I mean, we could probably keep going down the abstractions, but what we're really trying to get at from this is, yeah, if you need to condition yourself such that you're going to have to be a better conversationalist, do it. Find a way to be able to get around it. So for an agreeable personality type, find things that you're willing to not compromise on and practice that. And then for a introverted person, also like myself, you need to find ways to be able to give energy in a way that would be energy giving back to you. So finding the reciprocity, that tends to be really good for the introvert because then even though they're going to get tired at the end of the day because they spent their energy, they know they spent it in the right place, and I think that's totally okay. If for someone on my end of the spectrum, that's going to be just fine because you walked away knowing that all right, there was reciprocity here. My energy was spent in the right place. I was with the right people at the right time, and so there's a high order of meaning that came from it. So, oh, and I'm really glad we got to do some of that abstraction because these different combinations matter for us to be able to overcome and condition ourselves optimally.
Yeah, and then what I would add to that is there's basically a relatively straightforward framework for how authentic conversations play themselves out. One, probably with open minded or open, willingly engaging individuals. Two, authenticity behind your words, behind your conversation, and all that entails. And then a level of self awareness as well, in terms of knowing how to read the room, how to end the conversation, how to grow it such that, oh, everyone's like enjoying what we're talking about. We're trying to get to the nitty gritty, and we are. Let's keep it flowing. Let's keep it going. But in terms of this podcast, that's probably a good place to end it.
That's fine by me. Thanks again for always listening, Julian. It helps because I really do feel like I am being listened to, so you should know that.
Yeah, likewise. I enjoy this process of give and take. It's kind of like a team sport in a sense, and we're both on the same team, and we're just trying to play the game and win in a mutually fun way.
Sure, we all rise together. That's how you describe the term for people who actually want to work on the same team. So, everyone, thanks again for watching. Hopefully, we'll have more content as we continue to go. And thanks again. We'll see you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone.